Would you please introduce yourself, your name and where you are?
My name is Bob Swift. I am at Brown University. I'm a professor of psychiatry and human behavior, and also a professor of social and behavioral sciences in the School of Public Health and at the medical school. And I professionally, I am an academic physician, or researcher and clinician and teacher, triple threat, as they say. And my specialty is addiction psychiatry on the clinical side, and then in the research I work on understanding various aspects of addictions, particularly how medications work in the laboratory, in the human laboratory, where we administer substances to participants in research studies, and also do controlled clinical trials in the clinic to look at efficacy of various treatments.
To get to where you are, you describe a little bit how you moved along your path in alcohol research, and you can go back even to adolescence if you want to.
Yeah, it goes back to, in fact, it goes back before that. I always knew I wanted to be a scientist. Like many kids, I got fascinated by dinosaurs, and as a very young kid, and geology and all sorts of things. And then in fifth grade, I started entering science fairs. And it was a really incredible opportunity to learn, because you would go to the fair and you talk to people who had various science projects, and you'd learn a lot about a lot of different fields, and Tesla coils, and all of these things that people did. And I got the idea that I should do a science project myself. So for the first one, I built a cloud chamber, kind of from a book, but as I went on, my projects got more complicated. At one science fair, but by the time I got to high school, I won actually first place in the Chicago Science Fair, and got connected to a laboratory at Northwestern University that was doing research, and I had a job working there for the summer, mostly washing dishes and things like that, but also got to work with to learn how to do some experiments and things like that. And so I really knew that I wanted to be a scientist. And later on in college, I very early on started working in laboratories in addition to going to science classes, things like that. And ultimately was doing some of my own experiments. And I initially went to graduate school. It was interestingly, I applied to medical school, but I didn't get in. My grades weren't good enough. And I went to graduate. But I got into a graduate program and got a Ph.D. in pharmacology and physiology. And about halfway through the program, I realized that I really did want to go to medical school as well, because I wanted to work with humans as well as animals and tissue and things like that. So I worked it out with my advisor and the dean and everything, and they actually let me into medical school. And so I ended up with a combined degree, PhD and an MD. And how did I get to alcohol research? When I was in college, I took a pharmacology course. There was a lot of, this was the late 1960s, early 70s. There was a lot of drugs on campus and things, and I was kind of interested in drugs, and so I thought I'd like to learn about what's going on, and took a pharmacology course, and I just really loved it. I really loved it, and as part of it, we studied alcohol, and alcohol was a truly fascinating drug because unlike most medications and drugs, there's specific receptors that these chemicals bind to in the human body, and that's how they cause their behavioral effects. And alcohol doesn't have a receptor. It's it's a promiscuous drug. It binds to a lot of different places and has many different effects. And I thought that was kind of very fascinating that a drug that kind of worked differently than most other medications. So that's kind of why alcohol, because I thought it was kind of different and kind of fascinating in that sense. And then of course alcohol is being interested in health and public health. It's a major public health problem, and so as a young student, I wanted to do something to make a difference also that would end up helping people.
I hear various themes in there. Curiosity, big one. General curiosity, um, desire to help people. Interesting path. Um, what challenges did you encounter along the way?
Um, well, the challenges were, the path is difficult. It's a lot of hard work to learn all the things you want to learn as a scientist. And there's also as I said, I didn't get into medical school in the beginning because I had other interests in college, and I took a lot of liberal arts courses and things like that. And at one point, I thought I was going to be a writer, and so I took all these novel courses and things like that. But ultimately, by the third year, I had uh, decided I wanted to go to medical school, but then it was like too late to catch up. So that was a challenge, and kind of getting around that. And but being persistent, and I reapplied when I was in graduate school. So then I got in, and I was able to combine everything together, and ultimately achieve what I wanted to do of being a scientist and a clinician. Um, there are challenges, expenses. I was lucky. Graduate school was paid for by uh, thanks to NIH. I had uh, the department had early some funding, and it was for training. It was before now they have a different mechanism, the T32 grant, or various things like that. But there was some funding, so I got my most of my graduate school paid for it, thankfully, and but not so much in the medical school. And so that was a challenge. Had to take out some loans, and I was married then, and I'm still am 50 years later.
Congratulations.
The same woman, and I was very lucky in that way. That wasn't a challenge per se, but it was. We didn't have a lot of money, and so financially, we got loans, and then you have to pay off the student loans, things like that. And that's a challenge, and I know it's the challenge for a lot of students right now. See people, accumulate quite a bit of debt, the basis of their school, and so we, accumulated some debt. That was a challenge, but not anymore.
One of the things that strikes me is the breadth of your background. You mentioned the writing in particular. Have you found that to be helpful in your current? You don't write novels now, I guess. You write review articles, you mentor people on their, including composition.
Well, one reason I didn't become a writer was because writing was hard for me. It's easy for some people. I have a daughter, wonderful writer. She's great at it, and it's always been a struggle for me. And you know, it's just hard work. There are people, you know, for whom it's just fluid. They just sit down and they write wonderful prose and or even scientific prose. And so I find it you know, work. And but I've been fortunate in that I've had a lot of people who work with me and who are good writers. And when you write together with somebody, that makes it easier. Uh, but I did learn, you know, I did learn obviously some skills and in research, you know, in order to you know, there's the old adage, publish or perish. And to some, you know, to some extent that is true, that people do need to publish their work and you know, get that information out there. So the that's very important. So that was work that one needed to do.
Yeah.
But for me, it's one of the harder aspects of my job.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that, because from someone who's very successful in their career, it's not that everything has now become easy. You still have your challenges. What brought you to Brown?
Oh, so after graduating medical school, my wife and I, my wife's also from Chicago. We met at college. Uh, so we both wanted to leave because we had gone to the same, you know, we college in the same city where we were born, and we wanted to go to a different place. So in residencies, I applied to, so after medical school, you do residency. And I decided I was going to do it in psychiatry. And you know, I looked at programs outside of Chicago and got accepted to one in Connecticut. And so we moved to New Haven and you know, went through residency there, and then decided we wanted to stay on the East Coast. And there wasn't a good job at Yale when I graduated, and but there was one up the coast, a couple hours in Providence at Brown, as a consultation liaison psychiatrist, and I really liked the medical aspect. There was an addiction unit at the hospital. Got interested in that, and so that's how I got up front.
In over the course of your career, you experienced what you would call any eureka moments?
Oh, yeah, they've been a few. You know, part of it is kind of looking at patterns and seeing how they fit together. So one of the early things I did, and I worked with a group, large group, but it was in my lab. I had started uh, doing alcohol administration studies, giving alcohol to social drinkers who were drinking small amounts, and I gave them a small amount of alcohol just to get them legally intoxicated, and looking at behaviors, and we had developed a scale working with one of the postdocs, Chris Martin, and there was a whole group actually there, but we did this study, and it was part of the development of the scale, and people were trying to understand how alcohol worked, and so it's called the biphasic alcohol effects scale, and it looks both stimulating and sedative effects of alcohol, because alcohol has both. And interestingly, stimulant effects predominate when alcohol levels are rising, when somebody starts drinking, and then sedative effects predominate when the alcohol level in the blood is dropping after someone stops drinking and alcohol levels going down. They feel more sedated, ready for sleep. And so we developed a scale to do that. And then about that time, there was news about a medication that had just come out. There was a group at Yale that had been investigating that. Dr. O'Malley and others, and also a group at Penn. In fact, there were two papers that came out at the same time. And I said, wait, I could use this scale to understand how the medication might be affecting alcohol intoxication if it didn't. So let's do it. And that was kind of, putting together these two things. So began using the scale to look at medications effects. We used a lot of it, and it's actually still used today
What
for
is the scale called?
the biphasic alcohol effect scale. So it's one of many self-report scales that scientists use when they're trying to understand the effects of drugs. But it was one. But it was really the putting together of the two observations and an aha, and let's use these two methods together. So I think that was maybe the major one. And I had some money to got an internal grant money to do that and hire a research assistant. So we went on and did the study.
Were you able to figure out where the drug was having an impact?
Yeah, interestingly, that naltrexone blocked the stimulatory euphoric effects of alcohol and actually enhanced the sedative kind of negative effects of alcohol. And that, is probably why this medication was effective in reducing drinking, because people, and then we went on and used naltrexone in a naturalistic studies and a bar study. We went into a neighborhood bar, and we brought groups of individuals in who were either on naltrexone or placebo, and we brought them in twice. Once they're on the medication or placebo, and the other time they got the opposite things, and they were drinking in groups. Then we said, for the next 2 hours, you can drink as much as you want, and it's on us. And the bartender was measuring how much each person drank for what they were keeping a tab, but at the same time, and at the end, if there were drinks that were unfinished, we measured how many milliliters of alcohol were, so we could calculate how many people drank and what they drank, and we basically were able to show that the medication was reducing the amount of alcohol. Even these social drinkers who were not they did not have alcohol use disorder. They didn't need treatment. They were, but it still reduced the amount they drank, and it made us think that this is how it's working in people who do have alcohol problems.
What a novel study.
Yeah.
In a truly natural setting.
Yes. And it was funny that so most of our sessions were done in the evening. So I would be leaving home after dinner to go to the bar, and I assured my wife that I was not drinking any alcohol, because obviously I'm doing the experiment. I have to observe things, and we were very careful. The study was approved by our our ethics committee, and we made sure people had transportation to and from they didn't drive home, it's like that. So it was done very carefully. But I was going to the bar an awful lot after dinner, but not drinking it.
The alcohol research field is very interactive, highly networked now and historically. What people you consider to have had an important impact on your research and on your other work in the alcohol field?
Yeah, boy, there are so many people, because of as you said, the interactive nature um, of this. I think that one person when I early was at Brown, there was a scientist there, a physician, a psychiatrist scientist, Walter Brown. His name, no relation to the Brown family, but Walter came to me and said, you should apply for this travel award to this interesting meeting, and so I did and got it, and have since become, active in the society, yeah, called the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology, and that's been a wonderful window into just uh, being around with other researchers, and Walter was a mentor, helped me with a number of things over the years. There were people I'd written a grant, my first grant, and it didn't get funded. And, there were folks at NIAAA, and there was a program for young investigators who wrote grants and didn't get funded. So there was like a grants workshop. And I remember it was actually in a nice place, it was Hilton Head. And although we stayed at the Holiday Inn, it's a fancy hotel, but it was, and there was a group of people there, at NIAAA who truly were the project officers there, Ray Litton, Joanne Furtick, who had just a really good, their goal was to, which is the goal of the National Institute on Alcoholism, is to promote alcohol research, and this is one way that they're doing it through education to help people grants, and so they've been very helpful over the years with those training things. Also met some people at the meeting. Somebody from Brown University, a mathematical psychologist, Robert Stout, and
Did you say a
mathematical psychologist, and he knew all about statistics and connected up. And Bob Stout and I have worked together since in a number of capacities, and so he was very helpful. The director of we had a Center for Alcohol Studies at Brown, and David Lewis was the first director, who was a internal medicine physician who ultimately became a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and he was a good mentor. He looked at a few of my papers, got involved in some early grants that he did, and Marku Winoila, who had worked at NIAAA for many years, was kind of an inspiration. So there are many people over the years who I think in many ways served as role models, and mentors. Sometimes would help with the paper, and or collaborators. I've been really, really lucky. One of the nice things about Brown and has kept me there is we have these awesome training programs, and so over the years there have been many trainees who've come in, and they're extraordinary, and been blessed in a way to be able to collaborate with some of these folks, and produce a lot of good research. Postdocs that have worked with me, Dina Davidson, Carolina Skopler, Lorenzo Leggio, people who I still work with, and have just been inspirations, and collaborators, and so those I could name tons of individual people who have just been really helpful. Murray Raskin, who I met at a IRG. I just happened to sit next to him. I ended up working on some research with him and on noradrenergic mechanisms in alcohol. So there are a lot of people. It's not just like one person. So anyway,
so conducting these interviews and sort of developing in my mind a map that's all these connections. It's an extremely connected network.
yeah. I can imagine polydimensional because my network will connect with somebody else's network.
Yeah. Maybe there's a research project in there.
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. Well, the molecular geneticists are doing all these, network
Yeah.
connections. Maybe you could apply some of the same mathematics.
So what do you see as historical moments in the course of medication development to treat alcohol misuse?
I think in the 1980s, it was 1984, may not be absolutely correct, but when naltrexone was FDA approved for treatment of alcohol, or maybe it's 1990, can't remember, but sorry. But that was a really kind of seminal event that here was a medication that could be used, and it was highly publicized. It was used in some very prominent clinical trials, like the combined study, some multi-site study that NIAAA supported, and we were a site. I was privileged to work on that. And I think that was one, really interesting. Well, hey, we have there was a medication 10 years, a number of years earlier, disulfiram or antabuse had been approved, but it wasn't used very much. And the hope was that, naltrexone and some of the medications that followed the years, that it became, kind of accelerated development to the companies were started getting into an interest in medications, pharmaceutical companies, and that looked like it was a moment to kind of change things. So there was another field now, and medications have continued to develop, all the way. There's new ones, now a lot of excitement. The GLP-1 antagonist drugs like Ozempic, or may help alcohol consumption. So the field is progressing, and that kind of started it off. Of hey, we can use medications to treat medication. That had always been done in an opioid setting, but methanol, things like that. But nobody had applied for applied the use of medications to alcohol, and so that was one thing. And the second thing I think, which is very important, is the idea of harm reduction. That for many years, people felt the only successful treatment outcome in the treatment of alcohol use disorder, alcohol dependence, that would be total abstinence from alcohol. And that's a high bar for people to achieve. And the recognition that, well, if you reduce people's drinking, maybe you can't get them abstinent. Abstinent is the best outcome, not drinking. But if you can reduce somebody's drinking from 24 beers a day down to 2 beers a day, isn't that something? You shouldn't say the person failed.
That's huge.
That's huge. That's huge. That's, because the harm that goes along with drinking a case of beer a day, 24 beers a day, is much greater than the harm of drinking 2 beers a day. And so that should be seen as a success. And so the clinical field has, over time, gradually embraced the concept of harm reduction, that even small gains are important in a person's, journey to health.
Do you think that the concept of harm reduction has gotten out into the broader, say, the primary care community? Is that out there yet?
It's mixed. That there are some who, predominantly, folks who are older and grew up, in a sense, their recovery was dependent on them being abstinent. So they're abstinent. They feel everybody needs to be abstinent. And many Alcoholics Anonymous groups or other self-help groups feel abstinence is the only response. So there are people who believe that, and then there but more and more people are understanding that harm reduction is okay. It's not perfect, but it may be from a public health point of view, it's important. And I can mention studies that there are two researchers' names that stick out. That first, Stephen Maistow, Syracuse, and then Katie Witkowitz, and have done really good research that shows that people who reduce their drinking, people who are abstinent at the end of a treatment session, at the end of treatment research. So they looked at this during a treatment study, and at the end of the treatment, the people who are the abstinent do the best. They're health-wise, they're psychosocially, everything's the best for them. But the people who cut down their drinking do almost as well. Not quite. So abstinence is still the best outcome, but cutting down gives you almost the same benefits as abstinence. And then the people who don't cut down, don't respond to treatment, and continue to drink at the level they were at the beginning of the study, before they got the treatment. They don't respond to treatment. Those individuals continue to do poorly. So it really supports the concept that harm reduction is, it's not as good as abstinence, but it's pretty damn good. It's darn good.
I've seen process of medication development and testing evolve over the years.
Yeah, I think throughout science, the technology, so to speak, of how to test a medication and how it works has evolved in terms of various designs of experiments. And also our approach to, in the beginning, all the research was done with really healthy individuals. Anyone who might have a medical problem or emotional problem, severe emotional problem, was excluded from these studies. It's just healthy folks. And that's a problem, because the general population, I mean, people who drink alcohol a lot often don't stay healthy. So one needs to test these medications in people with severe liver disease. So people who, alcohol is a major cause of liver disease, and people who drink heavily and prolonged, and many of them don't respond to treatment. And will they respond to medications? And that and there were some papers, there were some studies on people with severe liver disease, and showed that medications can be helpful along with traditional psychosocial therapy as well. But it took those studies lagged because it required kind of some time to recognize. And I think, also marginalized groups, historically were kind of excluded, uh, or just not studied. And it was hard to recruit people, different ethnicities and races, because the researchers weren't like them. People sometimes didn't trust the research, and now it's our researchers are more diverse, and the populations that come into the studies are more diverse as well. So that's been another change, a good in a good way, so that everybody has access to the research, and so those types of things have changed. And the other thing is big studies where in different populations, multi-site studies that are involve thousands of people are done, and rather than a small study with 60 people. And the initial studies are often that, but there are now mechanisms now to involve multiple sites to do the research in Chicago and Los Angeles and Texas and New England places. So you get a whole combination, and sometimes internationally. So to really get a better cross section of individuals, where we can see whether the medications work or don't work.
The theme I'm hearing is that the populations are becoming more representative.
Yes.
I wonder if there's anything that could be different among rural populations. They'd be harder to reach since they're not in these large.
Yeah,
catchments.
that's I think research in those areas, in rural areas, lags, and from what I've been reading in the press, and there's been a lot more substance use, including alcohol, in rural areas, in certain rural areas, that and because people are so spread out, it's difficult to do research. To require someone to, let's say there's a university there where somebody's doing, but it might be so there are people in farms, or in farming communities, or rural communities. It might be 300 200 miles away, and how are you going to get those people to the university site, or can you go out to them? But that's more difficult to do than, so a lot of the research gets done in cities where it's close by. People can take public transportation or easily drive to whatever the research site is. But that's a very good point. That
Yeah.
it's some research has excluded rural populations.
It sounds like it would be worth spending some time figuring out how to study rural populations in a practical way.
Yeah.
But I hear a lot of progress ready, say. What challenges to medication development do you see, and what could the research community do to remove or overcome some of those barriers?
So the main challenge with medications for alcohol use disorder treatment are that it has not been adopted by clinicians and patients in a big way. So the amount of people, I think there was a lecture here that something like only 3% of people with alcohol use disorder are treated with the medication now. And that's in contrast to something like people who have diabetes, who are treated, where 85% or 90% are treated with some medication, in addition to behavioral treatments like diet and exercise and things like that. So we still, the mainstay for treatment for alcohol is behavioral treatments, and there's clearly a incremental benefit for many patients by taking a medication, but they're not doing that. So, and the question is why? And there have been some study. We were involved in a study with some health economists at Brandeis that looked at that and found that there were barriers in healthcare systems. There were knowledge barriers amongst clinicians about treatment, about drugs, medications, and effectiveness. There were there's stigma in some ways that physicians are still not good at identifying alcohol use disorder in their patients and then referring to treatment or treating them themselves and other clinicians as well. So there, but in spite of the knowledge, I think there's still this barrier. And it's a bit unknown. And one of the problems has been that because of that, the pharmaceutical companies, which were initially very gung-ho about developing new medications and marketing medications for the treatment of alcohol use disorder, have found people weren't buying their the medications. They were losing money by developing this, so they kind of got out of the field. So much of the research has had to be supported by the National Institutes of Health, which is good. And that's what they're there for, to help human health and well-being. And but the private industry has not been as interested anymore because of the lack of adoption of uptake of the medications. So it remains a bit of an enigma. Why not?
Sorry, I'm thinking, or trying to figure out why that would be.
Yeah, no, and that as I said, there have actually been studies on looking at the barriers and what was identified and trying to overcome some of the barriers. And I think what the other thing is that is capacity in the system. I think one of the things, interestingly, that increased medication use in the alcohol field was the medications in the opiate field. That we have harm reduction medications like methadone and buprenorphine that are used to treat opioid dependence, opioid use disorder. And naltrexone is also another medication used to treat opioid use disorder. And so I think a lot more naltrexone is being prescribed for alcohol because people are familiar with it in the context of opioid use disorder. So that's helped a little bit of getting medications, desensitizing people to medications for alcohol use disorder, and also increasing the knowledge of clinicians and patients about the availability of these medications.
What would you like to see in the future? Alcohol research could be medication development, or in a more general sense. And what things then do you expect to see?
Well, I think more money for research, more resources. As I said, the pharmaceutical companies have kind of gotten out of the field, so they're not devoting resources toward the development of new drugs, or not the way they were doing. And now that may change with the new kind of the knowledge that the Ozempic-like drugs may reduce drinking as well. So that may set up a spurt of interest again. So that's one thing, but you know, on the federal level, most of the funding towards substance use goes to the opioid, it goes to the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which does wonderful work, and you know, friends that work there, and I know they do very wonderful work, but they get much more money than the Alcohol Institute, even though as a harm problem, alcohol is the same or worse in terms of its effects on human health and morbidity. And people die from alcohol use disorder. In fact, I believe more people die from alcohol use disorder than in a year than die from opioid overdoses. But there's much more attention given to the opioid overdoses. I'm not saying they should take away the interest, you know, the funding for research on opioids, because that's clearly an important public health problem. Alcohol is similar, and it should have the same level of funding as opioid research.
I wonder if that is because the many alcohol-related problems take longer to kill you. Falling off a ladder while you have a beer in your hand is one thing, or dying in a car accident is another. But developing cancer, heart disease, maybe those things take a while.
Those things take a while. Although for tobacco, it's one that tends to be a slow killer, so to speak, and tobacco gets a lot more money than alcohol research, and it, you know, it has been effective in reducing, you know, deaths from smoking a little bit, but again, that's another drug that gets a lot of influence. But here's alcohol. It's an example, and it's not getting the same amount of funding that emphasis on tobacco, because now things may change. I mean, the recent knowledge, as you just mentioned, that even small amounts of alcohol may increase cancer risk. I mean, a lot of tobacco research is funded by the National Cancer Institute as well as the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So maybe the Cancer Institute could start funding some alcohol research, since it's now a known carcinogen.
Change direction a little bit. For researchers who are at the start of their careers, and just for the audience, this is
water. It's water.
For people at the start of their careers, do you have any advice to offer, and including for clinical researchers or basic researchers who want to pursue medication development?
So I don't know. I was fortunate in the sense that I could start early, and so I think it's good if you want to be a researcher, and I'm speaking to the middle schoolers out there. You know, start learning science, and the earlier you do, I think the more you can learn and better, because you learn on top of what you know the structure that you build. So, you know, learning science and math is really important. And, you know, starting early is good. Take advantage of courses on the internet, take advantage of you know, special courses that might happen in your city. I was, you know, high school, in Chicago, the planetarium had a course for high school students called the Astroscience Workshop, you know, and it was kind of, we studied stars, but also, you know, there's fun things like UFOs, talking about those and things like that. But learned a lot of astrophysics, but not a lot, a little bit, but you know, that was a fun thing. Saturday morning, but I had to go downtown to the planetarium and take the course, but that was fun for me. So if science is your passion, follow it, So seek out teachers, seek out mentors, seek out people who, will help. I had a neighbor who was as a kid, I had a neighbor who was a pharmacist and had been interested in science. And he had an old microscope. And, he gave me his old microscope, which I still have, treasured. And
What did you look at with that microscope?
oh, pond water, he actually gave me some slides too, like a thing, bone and, an onion and, all of these things. So I used to look at the microscope and things like that. Uh, but, and he was later helpful. He connected me up with a um, uh, professor at the University of Illinois who had me come down there as just a kid, showed me around his lab and things like that. So things like that, take advantage of people who are scientists and say, can I see what you do? So that's to the middle schoolers, the high schoolers, and work on your education. And if you really think about the world and how it, what makes the universe run, what makes the mystery of life, and how our mitochondria are churning away all the time, and we don't have to think about it. Yeah, it just happens. But how does that work? Things like that. If you're interested, follow those things up. And then it again, as one goes on in career, mentors are very important. People you can work. You don't have to do it all by yourself. Find colleagues, find people who you can share things with, and share interests. Uh, you know, uh, Find mentors who can help guide you, um, both at school and outside of school, and look around for courses that might interest you at museums. The one I took at the planetarium, and just be open to to uh, to kind of learning new ideas, accepting new ideas, things like that. It's hard work. It's because particularly as a student when you're in college or uh, or high school or in middle school, you have your homework assignments and you've got to do your algebra homework or whatever that is, and uh, is there time to read biochemistry? Or take a course on the internet in biochemistry, free courses, and it's extra stuff, or even doing like a science fair project. So it's extra stuff, and but it's worth doing. But if it's your passion,
And for the research community in general, do you have anything you would add to all of us?
oh, well, I mean, I have been very lucky to be associated with a wonderful group of researchers, substance use researchers, the alcohol researchers. This research society on alcohol is just full of incredible people and colleagues, and uh, you know uh, I know that there are science can sometimes be contentious. I have a colleague who told me about being in a meeting and two people were arguing a issue about uh, use of nicotine replacement and kind of the vaping and whether that was, and it almost came to fist fight. because people each felt so passionately about their view. So always be open. As a scientist, we deal with hypotheses and paradigms shift. And the way we think about something now is much different than the way we thought about it, 10, 20 years ago. And the way we may think about 10, 20 years in the future will be much different, possibly, than we think about it now. So keeping that openness to science and to, because dogma and staying fixed, I mean, you can't, you don't want to, how could I say that? If everybody around you is closed, scientific community, so it's like, Galileo saying that, the earth went around the sun, and nobody believed, or even if they did believe him, they wouldn't accept it for political reasons, because it was political church, or at that point did not want to upset their teachings. And the science community needs to be open to new changes and thought and new ideas and new ways of thinking about the brain, body, and life, and all these things, and not be closed, and and not necessarily tied up with political views. So, and I don't think it is so much, but hope that continues, that there is this openness.
Yeah. And then for members of the public who may watch this video, do you have anything you'd like to communicate, say straight to public?
Yeah. So two things. I think there's a lot of anti-science these days that, at one point scientists were very trusted as individuals, and lately that's not been the case. And but I think it's for the public to understand that science is always changing. Science is based on evidence and hypothesis, and as the evidence changes. So, for example, there was a lot of anger about how, scientists, let's say we had this new virus, the SARS-CoV, virus that was causing COVID-19, and people were advising based on early studies. Well, you could be 6 feet distant, assuming that SARS was a droplet-borne virus, and that's good for droplet. But the point is, it's aerosolized, so the droplets spread a lot farther than 6 feet. So, but that wasn't known in the beginning, and so then it changed, and then it was, well, masks don't help, and then masks do help, and all of these sorts of things, because the data, particularly in a rapidly changing environment, the ideas change, and as scientists, we know that. We say that here's this article, this is the theory about how something causes something else. Well, for example, with alcohol, the idea was that small amounts of alcohol may be good for you. A lot of alcohol is bad for you. No question about that. But maybe small amounts of alcohol are good for your heart or something like that. And that was the dogma. And now we're finding the paradigm is shifting, and that even small amounts of alcohol may be harmful in terms of affecting cancer and actually negative affecting the heart. And it causes inflammation, and it may be associated with other brain issues like dementia and things like that. But so the paradigm, the ideas have changed, and scientists recognize that. But the public needs to see, when they read an article, this thing came out in the New England Journal, says coffee is good for you, and another one said coffee's bad for you. And so is coffee good for you or bad for you? And the idea is that, well, the evidence is equivocal. It's it's not always balanced. Should, so you need to realize that it's a moving target, so to speak. As we gain more knowledge, our conclusions can be more. We can be more assured of our conclusions, but it doesn't mean all science is bad because the paradigm changed and said, well, this is the advice we think you should follow, and then 6 months later, it's no, do this instead. It's that the evidence was based on incomplete data, and it took time to get the full data. It doesn't mean science is bad or not trustworthy. It just means that science is imperfect in the sense that it depends on the data and the evidence. And if you don't have all the data and the evidence, you can't have the final conclusion. And I think health officials need to also emphasize that based on what we know now, this is what we think you should do, but it could change in the future.
Yes, we're not trying to trick anybody. We're learning.
Yeah, we're learning. We're learning.
The public is learning.
Yeah, and with many things, we find that things change. There's a new medication that people start taking because it's good for this, and in small studies, it selected populations. It seemed to work, but then you start giving it to many people, and people start getting side effects and bad side effects or something of the medication, things like that. But we didn't know that in the beginning because the population, the size was small, and the side effects didn't show up. But when you give it to when many thousands of people start taking this new medication, side effects may show up, and people should know that every medication has side effects. And so, but sometimes they don't appear in the beginning, and we learn more, and then can advise later. So I think we may find that with the Ozempic-like medications, which are great for helping people to lose weight, but they do have some side effects. And if you listen to the commercials, if you listen to the words under the smiling people who are all happy and everything in the commercials on TV for the direct-to-consumer, it may cause pancreatitis and blah, blah, blah. So there are side effects of all of these medications, and so nothing is, and we continue to learn over time.